What Sue was trying to say is I'm a nursery vagabond. I've had a lot of positions in a lot of different places, but advocacy is a really good part. I've been with the Maryland Nursery and Landscape Association as a member for a long time, almost 40 years, I guess, and long enough that I'm their historian as well. So that's part of the reason that I get to do this presentation. I have questions about you guys. So how many of you live in Maryland? Actually live in Maryland? Well, that's great. So most of you are out of state. That's terrific. How many of you are production driven for production nursery? Yeah, and all right, good. And where's your nursery?
Martha Vineyard.
Oh, that's a tough way to live. Well done. So, well, that's great. One of the things that I admire most is people who can do propagation, because that is an absolute art form, and especially with plants like these, they don't happen overnight. And also to have the eye, essentially like an artist's eye, to be able to distinguish some of the subtleties and the differences between certain plants, to know whether they're going to be a new selection or not, and what their habits and benefits are. So I really enjoy that. How many of you went to London Town yesterday? Did everybody get to do that? Yeah, oh, wonderful. So a little bit of history. I don't know how much you know about this area, but of course everything along the Chesapeake was brought on because of its access. It gave you an inland waterway for transporting everything. Those were the waterways, were the highways. And actually London Town was the Annapolis in the 1700s, 1700s. But because of tobacco production upriver, it ended up silting the river into the point where it was not a deep enough port for running the ships in any longer. And that's how Annapolis ended up being the major port here. And I think that's really interesting because, to give you an idea, clear cutting and farming the way they did then and the farming that we do now is so very different, and our management of resources is so much better. It makes it a lot better. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the horticulture industry in Maryland, and I'll do that sort of, hopefully it won't be too boring. I want to make it so that you also have a concept of what it's like in the nation, because what happens here in the Mid-Atlantic really is indicative of what happens in a lot of the nation. The difference is, in Maryland, we are less affected by, not to say that we're not affected by, but we're probably less affected by recessions because of government being so close. Everything here around Washington, D.C., you have a lot of highly paid folks, and the money flows, and so there's a lot going on. But I'll talk more as we get through here. And this will be my crib sheet, and we can turn the lights off now if that's okay. I've seen you all, and you've seen me, so that's enough. What am I doing here? There we go. So, talked a little bit about the colonial times here in the Annapolis area and London Town. And London Town is an amazing place. I haven't been there in a while. I was telling Sue I need to get back there because the things that change, your gardens are dynamic and things do change. But in any case, so it started in colonial times, and then I don't know how many of you have ever read the agricultural yearbooks from USDA through the decades. I think the first one, the oldest one I've read, was from 1865 or 66. It was right when President Lincoln had finally made agriculture a cabinet position within federal government. And it's really interesting because the person who was the director of agriculture at the time, and he was not yet a secretary, but he was like, his last shot, his parting shot was to publish in that yearbook that they have to leave politics out of agriculture, leave it to the scientists to advance agriculture. And things have yet to change. We're still in that same position. We still have too much politics involved and not enough research and development. And that's very frustrating. But in the yearbook, in the many yearbooks, horticulture was not really captured as far as what its economic value was and how it was being recognized. So it's just in with all the other grain crops. Then we hit like World War II. Well, prior to World War II, we had nurseries that were growing plants. Everything was in ground for the most part, and in-ground production. And I don't know how many of you have been in those old greenhouses where they would do cut flowers And so they had raised beds in their greenhouses for growing roses and carnations and snaps and plants for the cut flower industry. And in this region, our markets for those cut flowers would be Washington, Wilmington, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. But then World War II hit, and food production was really important. So a lot of our nurseries became food producers rather than plant producers, and changed all of that. But they did go back to it. Then we have post-war development. We're talking about especially some of these plant communities. Greenbelt was one of the first plant communities, and that's down near Washington. It's in Prince George's County. But Greenbelt was, it just gives you an idea of the density. And once you get into a more dense development, you're talking about the need for more plants. And so nurseries started producing for those needs. So then we can talk about now. Now it's really interesting because they're, instead of just growing in ground, I can remember perennial plants were grown in tar paper pots, and then sometimes the woody plants were grown in tin cans. They're like the number 10 tin cans or bigger, and they had all these, I mean, if you were trying to plant those, you had to get them out of the can, and that was a lot of work and a lot of waste. In any case, things have evolved. The plastic industry has really sort of changed, well, it's changed dramatically how we do business and agriculture totally, but within the nursery industry, we had to come up with a term because we have plants that were grown in ground. There still are B&B, or you dig them up, put them in a pot, or else they're above ground, and I'll talk about that in a second about how important that vocabulary is. In any case, we have right now, this is a report from Maryland Department of Agriculture in 2020, 298 nurseries, 1,300 plus plant dealers, plant brokers, a little bit different than dealers, and then our total acreage is over 10,000 acres in Maryland. And I'll describe a little bit of that as well. So we have a nursery that works in Maryland that was established in 1844. They weren't established in Maryland in 1844, but they work here now. 38 of the nurseries in Maryland have been in business for more than 55 years, which is really nice because you've got generational changes there. And then about 84% are family owned. And we're saying that because, and I think that number really is a little bit skewed because there are a lot of family owned businesses that are incorporated. And so it appears to be a corporation rather than family owned, but it's a family owned corporation. 27,000 plus acres used for horticultural production. So you can see how that's sort of changed. And I'm going to show you this map because Maryland is really separated into many different geographical areas based on, we've got I'm going to step over here if that's okay. We've got what we call the Eastern Shore, and we have Lower Shore, Central Shore, and then the Upper Shore. And Cecil County is actually considered part of this area. This is really the food belt for Maryland, and a lot of the, it's just great soils and access to a lot of roads, and it's a wonderful place to grow, not as much development. A lot of the folks when Long Island in particular, and parts of New York and North Jersey, when they started building houses and industry up there, a lot of the nurseries and landscape companies came down to came to Delaware and southern Jersey and also Maryland and started working here. So some of our largest nurseries actually started off in Long Island, and then generations later, here they are. Anyway, we have the Eastern Shore, we have Central Maryland. This is called Central Maryland right through here. This purple is Southern Maryland, but it also includes sort of Anne Arundel County. You're in Anne Arundel County right now. Southern Maryland also used to be the tobacco. That was their biggest industry, was tobacco. In the 80s, maybe 90s, I guess, there was a tobacco buyout in which the federal government and state government paid farmers to no longer to transition from tobacco to other specialty crops, and so in a lot of cases they transferred into horticultural crops, ornamentals in particular. That's Southern Maryland, Central Maryland, and then we have Western Maryland. So here we have this great growing area. This is called the Piedmont because you're starting to move up into higher elevations, and then you get into the mountainous regions of Maryland. It's so changing. So really, Western Maryland, there's not a lot of nursery activity there. The soils are shallow. Access to the populations is stretched. It's a lot more. It takes you longer to get your products to market. You don't have your direct marketing access as well. So I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to understand how diverse Maryland is in its regions, and really makes a difference in what we do here. So we talk about, it's nice to have some idea. You have 44% of the production is woody plants, and I say production is production and sales. 21% annuals, 15% herbaceous perennials. Specialty greenhouses at 2% is still $30 million, and even aquatic plants, which didn't even show up on our radar until maybe 20 years ago, and that's about $11 million at 1%. And then you have all others at that's $213 million. So economically, there is a big driver here in Maryland. We have the largest commodity group in Maryland is the poultry. It's actually broilers, and that's almost exclusively on the Eastern Shore. And the second largest crop commodity is ornamentals, or nursery and landscape plants. And that's pretty astounding because you're doing that on 10,000 acres instead of doing it on hundreds or thousands and thousands of acres that you would get for your grain crops and your normal crops. So economically, it's a very strong group, but we have to prove that. So the industry, the Maryland Nursery and Landscape Association, has over the years come up with about every 5 years they fund having an independent study done about the status of horticulture in Maryland, and we try to do that each year with an unbiased organization. It's been done by, used to be done with USDA, and then they started laying people off or not hiring, and so when we used to have 3 people in Maryland with USDA for ag statistics, we have 1 person in the region that actually is Delaware and Maryland. So then we had University of Maryland help us. That was very helpful. And then there was a group in Salisbury University that helped us out. In any case, it's important to know that for us to have that information in order to prove to ourselves what we're doing and where we can change and improve. And then also it's important for us to be able to go to our legislators who are actively trying to put us all out of business, if you're in agriculture in particular, and prove to them that this really has a huge effect on Maryland's economy and to their constituents and their livelihood, the way they live. But it's interesting that the largest part is of its landscape and/or interior scaping, installation, and maintenance is the largest. But of course, it's not so surprising because that's your retail dollar. And then you got your grower and wholesale. This was 37.46%. Grower and wholesale is 25.9%. And then you get to these others. We're kind of lucky now too because we have direct marketing in a lot of cases. So a lot of our folks can sell. I say a lot. Many of our folks can sell directly at a farm market, which gives them the retail dollar that they may not otherwise get. So then I want to talk a little bit about the method of growth. You can see here we've got field grown, container grown, in ground, container grown, above ground, and greenhouse operations, cut flowers, and others. So I talked a little bit about having the containers. In 1998, because there was an unusual fish kill earlier and a couple of years earlier, they were blaming it all on the nutrient load in the Chesapeake Bay. And so emotionally, they came up with the Water Quality Improvement Act of 1998, which really, the only time water was mentioned in the whole act was in the title. Everything else was about regulating how producers use nutrients. And it really it was quite a stronghold on the ag industry. The good thing that it did was once that law came into being, everybody said, well, we follow the science. And the science hasn't been there because federal government hasn't been providing the land grants the money they need to do the research. We need the money to do the research, and thankfully the legislators decided, okay, we'll start funding you. And a lot of great research was done at the University of Maryland to help us understand how these nutrients were being used. In our industry, they tried to regulate us as a field crop. And so you're looking at a crop that's 7 to 10 years right here, and you're not treating that. You can't treat that as a field crop. And you're looking at plants in containers that are above ground, and that's definitely treated very differently. So we had to come up with some new vocabulary so that when the regulations were being built, it really made sense to our industry. Out of ground production became the term. And so out of ground is essentially container production. You may say, well, what is container in ground? Well, the pot and pot is essentially a container in ground production system. And so you have a sleeve in ground, and then you have a potted plant that goes in that sleeve. And there are a lot of benefits to that, make it kind of interesting. Anyway, because of regulations, things changed, but thankfully, when you're a producer, you want to do things in the best, most economical way as well. And it turns out there were a lot of things that have come up, especially those biometric diodes that can help you understand or give you feedback on moisture and all the climate stuff, your humidity, temperature, all of that, and that's helped as well. So the container grown sales, and includes types of greenhouse production, 63%. That's been a huge swing in the last 30 years because it used to be a lot more field grown products. Labor has a lot to do with it. Space has a lot to do with it. You can turn your space over a little more quickly using the out of ground production. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we've changed in this world a little bit, and then how it's changed. When the retail box stores, I don't know how you all felt about it, but the folks in our industry were freaking out when the box stores started providing plants because they were going to be using it as a lost leader. They were going to be undercutting everybody, and that was a big deal. We were lucky enough in Maryland that one of our growers, a greenhouse grower, decided, well, yeah, the big box stores don't know anything about taking care of plants and selling plants. And so we're going to provide the merchandisers to keep those plants fresh and good looking. So our producers are like, they're feeding the box stores. Somebody's feeding the box stores, and the sales are going out there. Independent garden centers have taken a hit, but they have to provide something a little bit different than the box stores will provide, and that is most often knowledge and personability and all of that. I don't think, ultimately the box stores I think they've been good for our industry, but at the same time, you're not going to get the same information or the same quality of information from a box store that you would get from independent folks. Probably the biggest thing that's happened to our whole system, food and everything else, is the interstate system. When the interstate came into being, then products could come in from all over the United States, particularly from the South, where labor's cheaper, land's cheaper, cost of living's cheaper, and so everything's being shipped north. And even in our case, a lot of the plants are shipped north from here because in the New England area, in New York and all, they're used to paying a higher dollar for products. So we have a lot of our nurseries that are shipping things straight north. But that interstate highway had a huge influence on our industry and every other industry. Democratic free, and so we look at our cycles, and then I got my pet peeves too, but part of it says, do it for me or do it for yourself era. I don't know how many people are cutting their own grass now, but if you look at the Mow, Blow, and Go guys, they're all over the place here. Now I was in Arizona, and you had to really look hard to find any single person doing that. But here, you'll see, if you're caught in traffic, you can probably see mowers and blowers going, sitting in traffic with you. But that's changed because a lot of people, with 2 family members working, the 2 adult members working, they want to spend their time, their free time, so-called free time with family and all of that. So we've got a part of the industry that's thriving on of that. The do-it-yourselfers, for a long time, everybody was a do-it-yourselfer. We came from an agronomic society, and people were used to growing their own food or being out in the garden and working with their plants and flowers and trees and all of that. That's become so less. When I was landscaping, I realized that my goal was, the client's goal was to have their landscape look good at 10 miles an hour. And that means that when they're driving into the garage, it has to look good. They go from the garage into the house. That's all they see. If they're looking at it when they're driving in, that's all they see. So rather than say, oh, this is going to be great, it's going to smell great, it's going to, you wouldn't believe how nice it is when, even in the wintertime. They don't want to hear any of that. If they can't see it from their car, that's it. It really has changed quite a bit. Our nurseries did grow in the 80s, 48%, which is pretty remarkable. And fueled by demand, baby boomers, of course, I'm the height of the baby boomers, and a lot of us here are height of the baby boomers. So we've been competing against each other for a whole lot of things. Talk about the fads and trends, and I talked a little bit about tobacco buyback, but fads and trends. So media has a huge influence on what people's tastes are, and this is my pet peeve. We have a challenge of getting people to understand how valuable plants are to their landscape. I mean, why do you go outside if it's not for the trees and the shrubs and the flowers and the turf? No, we're going outside because of the hardscape and the Gucci grill, and we're going to have the fire pits now and all this other trash. Well, it turns out that it's really places like HGTV. Even though on their website they've got this great section that's about outdoors and plantings and everything, but the advertisers on their TV shows are all about the hardscapes and the outdoor fixtures, lighting, all of that stuff. So that's all they concentrate on. And years ago, in the early 70s and 80s, when Maryland Public Television and Home and Garden TV, they started out, it was about the plants. I mean, we all enjoyed learning about the plants. And then because the advertisers, these guys with the hardscape products, they've got the deep pockets to pay for advertising, and the plants are totally ignored. And if they aren't ignored and they actually put plants in, they're doing it wrong, absolutely wrong. It's very frustrating. So that's why it's important to get the next generation involved. Try to get them to help everybody. So our supplemental season, they added landscape design, architectural services, snow removal. The retailers increased their holiday stuff. Actually, I did a very, when I had a landscape business, a lot of our work was in the Inner Harbor, Baltimore, when it was a thriving place. And we did holiday tree lighting along the public spaces. And that was a big part of what we did, because it took a little bit of our planting time in the fall, but that meant we had work in the winter as well, when we otherwise wouldn't. So I was able to keep staff on all year long. So diversification was really helping. The changes in the production technique. Now, this is one of the things that really frustrated me. In one of the surveys we did a few years back, we would ask, what are the things that really are keeping you from being able to expand your business? Regulation and labor are two of the big ones. And so then a question was, would you feel, how do you feel about investing in mechanization? Well, they weren't involved in that. I'm like, how can you say labor is a big problem and you're not going to try to solve that problem in part by mechanization? So it's just an anomaly. I couldn't figure that out. But there is mechanization. trying to reduce the need and expense. And I don't know how many of you have ever seen some of these robotic systems in the greenhouses. It's absolutely fascinating. The seeding, the pot filling, the placing them on the trays or on the tables, and growing spaces. There are times when not a single person has touched a plant until it goes in the truck, and it's pretty amazing. But most of that development happened over in like Holland, the Netherlands and all, because they've been dealing with this labor issue for a long time. And here we can see Stanton playing with the drone. That was a Catoctin, wasn't it? I think that was a Catoctin. Yeah. So, in any case, even drone technology, and that's really pretty amazing what they do with the drones, especially for crop analysis. With infrared and everything else, they can actually tell when you've got disease and insect pressure, nutritional deficiencies, all of that just from the sky. But applying.
That one is Dorothy, and she's a spray drone.
The name of the drone is
yeah,
Dorothy?
You name them, and that one's named Dorothy.
Oh, okay. Is she dateable?
Named after Kurt's grandmother.
Well, Dorothy seems to, she had a little problem getting started that day, as I recall. But yeah, between sprays, and this is another area where technology has been amazing, because with the GIS and GPS, you can tell exactly what products you've applied, where you've applied them. You don't have to do a broadcast if you know your pressure is only in certain areas. So being able to control the amount of pesticides you might be using and nutrients that you'd be using. I have to say, I was fortunate enough to be awarded the Professional Achievement Award by the nursery and landscape industry, and at that time my wife and my mother were there, and they heard the people from the Horticultural Research Institute talk about making pots out of chicken feathers. And my wife says, you know, we knew we were at a weird place when they talked about making pots out of chicken feathers and nobody laughed. I guess that makes sense. But we have the big poultry industry here in the Delmarva area, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia. And yeah, trying to get the pots out of something that, you know, a waste product that otherwise isn't being utilized. Plant science, of course, you guys are involved in a lot of that if you're doing selections and breeding and propagation. As I say, that's always good. Your IPM, when I first got out of college, it was spray, spray, spray. But soon after that, and I got out of college in 1977. So by 1979, the University of Maryland, and I'm sure other places, were working on integrated pest management. And the coolest thing about that was when they realized that there were fungi and bacteria and other insects that would really infest other animals, like caterpillars in particular, then the pathologists and the entomologists were taking photographs of all these gory shots of, you know, caterpillars exploding from inside out, and it was really cool. I really enjoyed that. But we were lucky to have a lot of IPM starting in this region and starting to integrate all of that. And now Stanton has helped train a lot of the IPM scouts that we use, because our growers recognize the value of that, and they're actually hiring independent contractors to come in, look at their production centers, and know how to work with that. Same thing with the research has really helped us with water strategies. We used to do the whole drenching where, you know, you wait for the water to run out of the pot, and then you knew you had watered enough. Nowadays, you can do a cyclical watering so that you just keep a certain amount of moisture. And the using computer analysis and all, you can have a better control. It's a great management tool, so that's really helpful. Overwintering in this area has been a big issue. They used to use salt hay on plants that were outside. They used salt hay because there weren't a lot of weed seeds in there. And then the research started with some of these overwintering structures and overwintering products, and even still people are using blankets and all to cover and uncover because we have the freeze-thaw issues here. But really that technology has made a big difference in working with that. So the obstacles, we talked about some of those obstacles. Labor is one of the largest ones in 30 years. The federal government has done nothing to help us with that. They've just clouded it up and made the issues a lot more challenging. Of course, we talk about climate change. I was reading an article the other day where it's a 100-year cycle. We're in year 41 or something like that of a typical 100-year cycle, or 100,000 year cycle, 100,000 year cycle. But we do have climate change. There are plants that are growing here now that would never have made it through the winters 30 or 40 years ago. So dealing with that, pests and diseases. How many of you are familiar with the emerald ash borer? Yeah. How many of you? Yeah. You know, Stan, I've never seen an adult emerald ash borer, but I've got dead ash trees everywhere.
We'll get you a sample.
Well, I mean, I've seen them, but I haven't seen them in the landscape. I mean, I'd have to be there. Yeah, it's really weird. And now the stink bug, or the lanternfly. They are insane, just insane. Anyway, so these introduce pests and diseases, and it's pretty remarkable that we aren't inundated with even more, considering how universal or global our transportation is of plants and products. Zoning restrictions, that's a big deal. Environmental concerns. One of the things my degree is in ornamental horticulture. That would be environmental horticulture now. We have a lot of folks that are engineers. We're the first ones to put in stormwater management ponds and infiltration ponds and all of that. And it looked like an engineer did it. And it turns out they were stagnant and just a mess because they weren't considering the living habitat, or how you store water and keep it vibrant. And now a lot of many of our folks, our landscapers in particular, are going in and cleaning as stormwater ponds out, and then establishing plant communities that are actually designed to be in those situations where you have water and flooding and all of that. As far as opportunities, we're only 23% of the plants sold in Maryland, 23% are imported from other states, so we could start to pick that up, add it to our production. The environmental horticulture just talked about, your buy local. A lot of that has to do, we even have a nursery that's doing 100% organic as part of their nursery. I'm not sure, it doesn't make sense to me, but he's getting a premium for it, so that makes sense. Expanding populations, of course, in this region in particular, and increased awareness of the value of green industry. Now, we are so behind in promoting all of agriculture, but our green industry in particular, 30, 40 years behind. People really don't understand the true value of what plants bring to their lives. And it's because we don't have the deep pockets. If we were the the paver company, yeah, we'd spend more money on advertising, but we just don't have those deep pockets. Or also it could be the farm mentality where it's, I'm trying to make a living on my farm and I could barely afford, I want to be able to afford to send my kids to college and all of that. How much should I really spend on advertising? So we still have that to deal with. How many of you belong to associations other than the society? Yeah, good. Why? Yeah, go ahead. Why are you a member of an association?
Because we like the environment and loves it.
And who else had their hand up here? Somebody else want to respond? Yeah, go ahead.
Interaction between and collaboration.
Sure. So you've been a long time member of everything.
I always learn something new,
Yeah.
and there's no substitution for the face-to-face contact and question and answer and
Yeah,
learning experience.
exactly right. And would you have been exposed to the work the university has done to enhance our industry, or the work that individual nurseries do on their own for their own experimental purposes, and how do they share that? It's not a great percentage of folks within our industry who are actually members of these associations, and yet it's these associations that actually are the caretakers of the entire industry, rather than just a few individuals. And so it's very frustrating. It would be great to have more people involved. This particular association started in 1934, which is, it's a long time ago. I mean, you can think about what was going on then, but we're expanding as a nation as well as in so many ways. Associations, including this one, education and recertification. Now there are certifications for, that's actually relatively new, maybe the last 40 years or so, where you have to become certified. My brother worked for a truck repair shop, and he would weld, he'd do brakes, he'd do engines, he'd do everything. He didn't need a certification for any of that. I had tree expert's license, a home improvement contractor's license, a pesticide applicator's license. It just went on, and I'm thinking, who am I killing? And yet he's got this truck that can be running down the road with bad brakes or a frame that's gonna just fall apart. So we are heavily regulated in those areas. So recertification's been a big part of our associations. Government affairs has been a big part in Maryland. There are the different factions. You have the Holly Society. Here we have like the Arborist Association, the nursery folks, the landscape folks, and they may have gone to Annapolis, which is our state capital, to lobby for certain aspects, certain laws that would help their certain section. But the legislators were hearing from all of these different factions. And so in the year 2001, I think it was, they started the Maryland, it's called MAGIC, Maryland Green Industry Council. So that's a council of all these entities that can speak with one voice. Now, if there are issues that they can't all agree on, then that individual entity can go out and lobby on their own. But basically, by speaking with one voice, it's made a huge difference in really helping our industry. Accreditation, advocacy, marketing, promotion, certifications. The Nursery and Landscape Association of Maryland came up with the Certified Professional Horticulturist program in the mid-'80s, and it still goes on today, and we were able to get it so that you can get a student certification if you are in a sanctioned program in high school, in a public high school in Maryland. So you can sit for the test, the exact same exam that the industry folks take, and get a student certification. And once you've demonstrated you have your post-secondary and or work experience, then you can get the full certification. It's been amazing to me that that's gone on for so long. It's still very popular and still needed. Scholarships and then sponsored, there are sponsors and donors for all of that. Sue mentioned MANTS. Am I running out of time here?
Go ahead, this is really important.
Okay, so MANTS is the Mid-Atlantic Nursery Trade Show. And how did this get started? What was this all about? Well, there were trade shows around, but they, once again, segregated. A little bit here, each state had their own thing. Well, the folks in Virginia and Maryland got together at a cocktail party. Originally, they didn't really trust each other. But here at the cocktail party, they apparently went up to the host and said, that guy from Virginia is not such a bad guy. And the guy from Virginia is saying, hey, that guy from Maryland's not such a bad guy. So they got together and they decided they would do a combined trade show. And I think their first, they may have had 64 booths or something like that at their first couple of trade shows. Since they've settled in Baltimore, I think there are like 1,100 booths that are sold, something like that. I'll get probably have all that information right here. But let me see, back here it says, MANTS means business. And there have been many trade shows throughout the United States. Most of them don't exist anymore. There are just a few that are stable, but MANTS means business. One of the things that happens for MANTS, there are a couple of good things that happen. One is, it's in January. It's the beginning of the year. It gives everybody a chance to chat and commiserate. Oh, last year was terrible, or yeah, last year was good. These are the things I need. I got to find plants. I can't find plants. When we hit a recession, everybody stops planting in the nurseries, which is probably the wrong thing to do. You should start planting in a recession, because then you're going to have the materials when the money comes back. In any case, they don't take people off of the showroom floor for educational purposes. It's all selling the whole time they're there. So that really works out well. It was established in 1970 it was Maryland and Virginia, and then later they added West Virginia, and it's owned by those three associations. Currently 925 companies from 40 states, Canada, Europe, Asia, and more. 300,000 square feet of executive space, over 3 miles of carpet, which is crazy. The economic impact in the Baltimore region is $11 million. There are usually 11 to 12,000 people that'll attend this. It's a barometer for the state of the industry. It absolutely is a barometer for the state of the industry. When I say it's in January, it's really helpful because you're gonna get a feeling for how, from really the global feeling of how our industry is gonna be thriving or sort of, what would you call it, just sort of pulling itself together. And the economic engine for the associations, it absolutely is that. It really drives, most associations struggle, and you guys are probably the same, getting membership, getting funds in to do the things you want to do. Without MANTS, the three associations, Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland, would struggle to be able to just do the minimum with dues money and all. But as it is, the dividends they get from this show helps them be much more productive, much more benevolent, and all of that. And you can see this is just gives you an idea. These guys are absolutely chatting, although the guy in the sales booth doesn't look too convincing to me. Yeah, I'd be a little worried. But you can see, I had to put this in here for you. But Brad is definitely all about business.
Foxborough Nursery.
Foxborough Nurseries, yeah. And he's got the holly in the background here. But they are absolutely all about business. And then, of course, Damon, that smile sells a lot of plants. So he actually is a buyer for Manor View Farm, and that's something that's really changed in my lifetime. When I started out, you had to go out and buy the plants from each of the individual growers. Right about the same time, they started to do re-wholesale, or these guys would be dropping plants or buying plants, dropping them off in one central location, and the landscapers could come in and buy it. And then as that was evolving, mostly it was landscapers coming in and buying the plants and carrying them away from there. Now, I think Manor View is about 80% of it's shipped. So they do the selection and ship it directly to a job site, which is really good. So we talk about industry partners. Couldn't be done without the partners. You have the Maryland Department of Agriculture. They help us in so many ways. We actually have a very collegial relationship with our regulators, which is really helpful. That doesn't happen in every state. The University of Maryland and Extension, so they do research, development, outreach, which is incredibly, you'll find out about that between David and Stanton here. Maryland Farm Bureau, Maryland Green Industry Council, that's that legislative watchdog. American Hort, Lead Maryland. Lead Maryland is an agricultural leadership program for individuals in agriculture. Very, very helpful. Maryland Ag Ed Foundation, that's a nonprofit that tries to promote the importance of agriculture in everybody's lives, and they do it mostly through the elementary schools. Nursery Landscape Association Executives of North America. Just like you guys get together to do this, those executives from all the associations in the state or in America do that. I want to throw in this too, about the American Landscape Institute. Some folks in Baltimore County, landscape contractors and growers and all, were like, well, where are we going to get our domestic help? We in the 80s, you couldn't get domestic help, and so it all became immigrant help, and the immigrant help was through guest workers. I thought for sure we'd have a lot of Hispanic businesses in Maryland, or the whole region, because so many were coming here to work. But there were guest workers. They were going home, they're sending their money back to their countries and their families in their countries. So here we are, baby boomers, Grace Tsunami, we're bolting, we're leaving as quickly as we can. And those jobs have to be filled. Thankfully, Grace is here. She's the anomaly in the room. I'm so glad to see Grace here, because that's what we need, is younger folks and that are more than just, we have so many students that go through a 4-year college, and then they go to an employer and say, well, I need this in order to pay my college fees back, and then, but I have no experience. And the employer is like, well, you gotta have experience. I can't pay you what you want. at that level without the experience. So what happened is a collaboration between industry and a community college. We came up with American Landscape Institute. It's a nonprofit, and the way it works is they recruit students, people who are interested in the industry, but they don't know they don't know how involved they could be or any of that. And we collaborate with the community college of Baltimore County and their horticulture program, and it's designed so that we can do a certificate in 2 years where the students actually are working 4 days a week. The 5th day they're going to college. They take 2 courses each day. At the end of 2 years, they get a certificate in landscape design, installation, and maintenance. And these are college earned credits. So if they want to continue on, or maybe they have credits from other college experiences, then they can get their AA and actually move on to a 4-year degree if they want. But more importantly, their employers who are sponsoring them are actually training them to work in the industry. And these are some of the folks, I just want to say, none of these folks came directly from industry or any part, with the exception of this person went to a school that had an agriculture program. This person went to a school, high school that had an ag program. But all the rest of them, some of them came from the art world, some of them came from psychology, or they may have college degrees, but it's not what they wanted to do. It's making a difference. We're in our 6th cohort right now, and it really is making a difference. So I guess that's it. Hopefully you have some better understanding of what the industry is like in this region, how the associations help. You're going to learn a lot more from these guys from the university, because this is their life, which is, we're so happy to have them. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Can you stay to take
I'll
questions
stay for a
later?
while, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I want to hear what these clowns have to say.
Okay.
Thank